The crystal spires of Nexus Prime stretched endlessly into the artificial twilight, their surfaces pulsing with streams of data that flowed like luminescent blood. Through the veins of the galaxy's most feared organization, somewhere in the highest tower, decisions were made that could erase entire civilizations with the casual indifference of deleting a file. Kale Shadowbane stood perfectly still in the center of the briefing chamber, his tall, lean frame casting no shadow despite the harsh lights overhead. His species, the Umbral, had evolved in the space between stars, and darkness clung to them like a second skin, where most beings radiated warmth and presence. Kale seemed to absorb light, creating a subtle distortion that made him difficult to focus on directly. His silver eyes, the only bright feature in his angular face, remained fixed on the holographic display floating before him. Target designation, Rose Whitmore. The synthesized voice of the Syndicate's Central Intelligence droned. Human female, age 28, occupation, Senior Librarian at the Grand Metropolitan Library, Earth Sector 774. The hologram shifted, showing a three-dimensional representation of a woman with warm brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, intelligent green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. She wore a simple cardigan over a floral dress, the kind of outfit that whispered of quiet afternoons and the scent of old books. To most observers, she would appear utterly unremarkable. Kel's enhanced senses, however, picked up something different. In the way she held herself in the surveillance footage, there was a grace to her movements, a purposefulness that spoke of hidden depths. When she reached for books on high shelves, her balance was perfect. When she interacted with library patrons, her awareness of her surroundings was complete. Threat level assessment appears minimal, Kale said, his voice carrying the soft, almost melodic quality common to his people. What makes this particular human worthy of Syndicate attention? The hologram flickered, displaying ancient symbols and text fragments that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Subject Whitmore has demonstrated unprecedented ability to decode pre-syndicate historical documents. Analysis indicates she has successfully translated 17 separate prophecy texts, including the Forbidden Scrolls of Ethon. Kel's silver eyes narrowed slightly. The Scrolls of Ethon were thought to be myth, stories told to frighten young civilizations into compliance. They supposedly contain predictions about the fall of galactic empires and the rise of something called the Quiet Revolution. Intelligence suggests she has accessed information that could destabilize current power structures. Across all 7 sectors, the voice continued. Her research has attracted attention from underground resistance movements. She must be eliminated before this information can be disseminated. Understood. Kale moved with fluid precision to the weapons array, selecting his preferred tools, a molecular blade that could cut through any known substance, a neural disruptor that could stop a heart without leaving a mark, and a personal cloaking device that would render him effectively invisible to human senses. Timeline for completion, 72 standard hours. Transportation to Earth has been arranged. As Kale prepared to leave, something nagged at the edge of his consciousness. In 15 years as the Syndicate's most efficient assassin, he had eliminated politicians, warriors, scientists, and revolutionaries, but never a librarian, never someone whose only crime was reading the wrong books. The journey to Earth took 18 hours aboard a Syndicate stealth ship, time which Kale spent studying the target's routines and memorizing the layout of her workplace. By the time he reached Earth's solar system, he knew Rose Whitmore's schedule better than she did. The Grand Metropolitan Library occupied an entire city block, its neoclassical architecture a testament to humanity's reverence for knowledge and learning. Massive stone columns supported a building that rose 7 stories into the sky, with reading rooms that could accommodate thousands of researchers and casual readers. Ancient oak trees lined the approaches, their leaves whispering secrets to anyone who knew how to listen. Kale materialized from the shadows across the street, his cloaking device ensuring that the few humans passing by would, at most, catch a glimpse of movement in their peripheral vision. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the trees, providing perfect cover for someone of his abilities. And there, moving through the organized chaos of the library's main entrance. Like a graceful dancer was Rose Whitmore, Cal's breath caught in his throat, a reaction that surprised him. She was more beautiful than the surveillance footage had suggested. Her warm brown hair caught the afternoon light as she hurried down the library steps, and when she paused to help an elderly man who had dropped his books, her genuine concern was evident in every gesture. She was wearing a soft green dress that complemented her eyes and a cream-colored cardigan that looked handwear upon. Cal found himself following her at a distance as she made her way through the city streets. She stopped twice, once to buy flowers from a street vendor, and once to pet a stray cat that wound around her ankles. Each pause gave Cal opportunities to study her, to look for weaknesses he could exploit. Instead, he found himself cataloging the things that made her remarkable. The way she thanked the flower vendor in what sounded like perfect Portuguese, the gentle care with which she examined the cat for injuries, the unconscious grace with which she navigated the crowded sidewalks. Rose lived in a converted brownstone in the University District. As he watched from across the street, she appeared in a third-floor window, carrying a cup of tea and what appeared to be a leather-bound journal. When she settled into a reading chair by the window, the dying sunlight created a halo effect around her hair. Cal activated his enhanced vision and focused on the book in her hands. His blood ran cold as he recognized the binding. It was one of the ancient texts referenced in his mission briefing, not a copy, but an original manuscript that should have been secured in syndicate vaults. As if sensing his scrutiny, Rose looked up from her reading and gazed directly out the window. For a moment, their eyes seemed to meet across the distance. Something passed between them in that instant, a recognition that defied logic, an explanation. Rose tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear, then returned her attention to the ancient book. But Cal had seen the small smile that crossed her lips, the subtle shift in her posture that suggested she knew she was being watched and was not afraid. Tonight, he would complete his mission. But something about Rose Whitmore had already begun to change him in ways he didn't yet understand. Night fell over the city like a soft blanket, bringing with it the sounds and sense of urban life. Restaurants filled with diners, theaters welcomed audiences, and the library's lights remained on as dedicated researchers continued their work. Cal maintained his position, watching Rose's window and trying to understand the strange reluctance he felt to complete his assignment. Around midnight, the light in Rose's apartment went out. Cal waited another hour, then activated his infiltration protocols. The building's security systems were primitive by galactic standards, and he made his way to the third floor without triggering so much as a motion sensor. The lock on Rose's door yielded to his molecular key in seconds. Her apartment was exactly what he had expected. Every available wall was lined with bookshelves, and stacks of volumes occupied most of the floor space. The air smelled of vanilla, candles, and old paper, with underlying notes of jasmine tea. It was the kind of space that invited contemplation and discovery, where time could pass unnoticed while the mind wandered through centuries of accumulated wisdom. Cal moved silently through the living room, his enhanced senses taking in every detail. Original manuscripts lay open on her desk, their pages covered with careful annotations in multiple languages. Star charts were pinned to one wall, with connecting lines drawn between constellations in patterns that seemed to correspond to the prophecy texts from his briefing. But it was what he found on her coffee table that made him pause. A cup of tea, still warm, sat beside an open notebook filled with fresh handwriting. She had been awake when her lights went out, working by candlelight to avoid detection. His target was more clever than the syndicate had anticipated. "I wondered when you'd finally come inside." Rose's voice drifted from the kitchen doorway, calm and unhurried, though I must admit, I expected someone a bit more traditional. Most assassins don't take quite so long to make their move. Cal spun toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving to his molecular blade. Rose stood silhouetted against the soft glow of her kitchen, wearing comfortable pajamas and fuzzy slippers. That made her look more like someone's favorite aunt than a galactic security threat. She held a steaming mug in both hands and regarded him with the same gentle curiosity she might show a lost cat, "You're not afraid," Cale observed, his voice carrying a note of genuine puzzlement. "Should I be?" Rose moved past him to settle into her reading chair, gesturing for him to take the seat across from her. "I've been expecting you for weeks." The patterns in the ancient texts were quite clear about your arrival, though they were frustratingly vague about your intentions. Cale remained standing, every muscle tense for action. "The Syndicate sent me to eliminate you. You've accessed classified information that threatens galactic stability." "Ah yes, the Syndicate." Rose sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Tell me, Cale Shadowbane, in all your years of service to them, have you ever wondered why they're so afraid of old books? Why ancient prophecies written thousands of years ago pose such a threat to beings with technology that can reshape worlds?" The sound of his name on her lips sent that same unexpected shiver through him. "How do you know who I am?" Rose reached for the leather-bound journal from her coffee table, its pages filled with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the candlelight. "Your name appears in 17 different prophecy cycles, always in connection with something called the convergence point, the moment when the hunter must choose between completing his mission and following his heart." "Prophecies are superstition," Cale said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Ancient nonsense used to control primitive populations, are they?" Rose opened the journal to a page covered with intricate diagrams. "Then explain how these ancient nonsense texts accurately predicted your species' evolutionary traits, your preferred weapons, even the molecular structure of your cloaking device. Explain how they knew you would arrive on Earth during the 3rd lunar cycle of this solar year, at precisely the moment when the old power structures begin to crumble." Cale stepped closer, drawn despite himself to examine the symbols Rose had translated. The diagrams were indeed accurate, disturbingly so. They showed details about umbral physiology that even the Syndicate's databases didn't contain. Technological specifications that shouldn't exist in texts predating galactic civilization. "Where did you find these manuscripts?" he asked. "They found me," Rose said simply. 3 months ago. A package arrived at the library with no return address. Inside were 12 original texts in languages that officially don't exist, along with a translation key that seemed to download itself directly into my mind. I've been dreaming in ancient tongues ever since." She turned the page, revealing a detailed illustration that made Kel's breath catch in his throat. It showed 2 figures, one tall and shadowed, the other small and surrounded by books. Between them lay a blade, its edge touching the spine of an open volume. The image was accompanied by text in flowing script that Rose read aloud. "When darkness learns to read by candlelight, when the hunter studies the scholar's heart, when blade becomes pen and death becomes word, the quiet revolution begins its truest part." "You're suggesting this is all predetermined," Cale said, fighting against the strange pull he felt toward both Rose and her revelations. "That we're following some cosmic script written by beings who died millennia ago, not predetermined," Rose corrected, rising from her chair to move closer to him. "Prepared for." The ancients saw the patterns, understood the cycles. They knew that eventually someone like you would be sent to silence someone like me. They also knew that when that moment came, we would have a choice. The space between them had narrowed to mere inches. Cale could smell her shampoo, something light and floral, and see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. His training screamed at him to complete his mission, to eliminate the threat she represented before she could further compromise his objectivity. Instead, he found himself asking, "What choice?" Rose smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. Whether to end the story they began or write a new chapter together. She reached out slowly, her fingers barely brushing his hand where it rested on his weapon. The touch was electric, sending warmth through his entire being in a way that defied every law of umbral physiology. His people were creatures of shadow and cold. They didn't experience warmth, didn't crave connection, didn't feel their carefully controlled hearts racing at a simple touch. "The prophecies speak of transformation," Rose whispered. "Not just for the galaxy, but for those brave enough to choose love over duty, hope over fear, light over darkness." Cale stared down at her hand covering his, at the way her fingers seemed to glow against his shadowed skin. Everything he had been taught Everything he believed about duty and loyalty to the syndicate warred against something new and unfamiliar awakening within him. "You're asking me to betray everything I am," he said. "I'm asking you to discover everything you could become." In that moment, standing in Rose's candlelit apartment, with ancient prophecies spread around them and her touch burning against his skin, Cale Shadowbane felt the first crack form in the armor he had worn for 15 years. The hunter had found the scholar, just as the prophecies foretold. The question was, what would they choose to do about it? Dawn broke over the city with the soft promise of another ordinary day, but for Cale Shadowbane, nothing would ever be ordinary again. He had spent the night in Rose's apartment, not as a predator stalking his prey, but as a student discovering an entirely new way of seeing the universe. They had talked until the early hours, Rose sharing her translations, while Cale found himself revealing details about syndicate operations. He had never spoken aloud. "You have to leave," Rose said softly, watching him from her kitchen doorway. As she prepared morning tea, "They'll expect confirmation of my death within 48 hours. When you don't report in, they'll send others." Cale looked up from the ancient manuscript he had been studying, its symbols now beginning to make sense in ways that frightened him. The prophecies mention others: Agent Dmitry Volkov, a syndicate enforcer known for cleaning up failed missions. Then, "We don't have long." Rose moved to her desk, gathering specific books and manuscripts into a leather satchel. "There's something I need to show you, but not here. The library has resources they don't know about." "Rose." Cale stood, his tall frame casting familiar shadows across her sunlit apartment. "You understand what you're asking. If I help you, if I choose this path, there's no going back. The syndicate will hunt us both." She paused in her packing, turning to face him with those remarkable green eyes. "The prophecies are clear about one thing, Cale. The old systems are already crumbling. We can either help guide that transformation, or we can be swept away by it. But we can't stop it." They left her apartment separately, Rose heading to the library through her usual route while Cale took to the rooftops, his natural affinity for shadows allowing him to move unseen through the city's vertical landscape. The plan was simple. Rose would access the restricted archives while Cale provided security, watching for any signs of syndicate pursuit. The Grand Metropolitan Library in the early morning was a temple to quiet reverence. Researchers moved through its halls with the respectful hush of pilgrims, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets and their voices kept to whispers. Rose moved through this environment like water, her presence so natural and expected that even Kel's enhanced senses sometimes lost track of her. Among the stacks, "The restricted archives are in the sub-basement," Rose murmured as they passed in the ancient text section, her words barely audible. "Sublevel 3, behind the medieval manuscripts collection. Meet me there in 20 minutes. Cale nodded and melted back into the shadows between the towering bookshelves. From his concealed position, he could observe the library's main entrances and monitor for any unusual activity. For 19 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Scholars consulted their references, students researched their papers, and the elderly gentleman in the corner continued his decades-long project of translating Mongolian poetry. Then Marcus Chen, the library's head of security, approached Rose at the circulation desk with an expression of barely contained urgency. "Ms. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice tight with concern, "there are some people here to see you. Government types, by the look of them. They're waiting in conference room B." Kel's enhanced hearing picked up every word from 30 feet away. His blood chilled as he recognized the description. Syndicate agents rarely bothered with subtlety when a mission had been compromised. They would have arrived with convincing credentials and bureaucratic authority, prepared to take Rose into custody for questioning that would end with her permanent disappearance. Rose's reaction was immediate and impressive. Without missing a beat, she smiled at Marcus and nodded toward the reference section. "Could you tell them I'll be right there? I just need to finish helping this patron find some materials on medieval poetry." Marcus glanced toward the elderly gentleman in the corner, who looked up with perfect timing and waved his hand in acknowledgement. The security guard hurried away, leaving Rose free to move. She immediately began walking toward the restricted access elevator, her pace casual but purposeful. Kale shadowed her movement through the stacks, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. 3 exits from the sublevel archives to potential choke points, and at least for syndicate agents if they followed standard protocol. Not impossible odds, but complicated by his need to protect Rose rather than simply eliminate threats. The restricted archives occupied a climate-controlled vault 3 stories, beneath the library's main floor. Here, the city's most precious manuscripts resided in temperature-controlled cases, protected from light, moisture, and the casual curiosity of the general public. Rose moved through the collection with practiced ease, her fingers dancing across digital access panels as she navigated deeper into the facility. Here, she whispered, stopping before a vault marked only with symbols that predated any known civilization, the Convergence Codex. The one text the prophecies say contains the complete transformation protocol. The vault opened to reveal a manuscript that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. As Rose lifted it carefully from its protective case, Kale felt something shift in the air around them, a subtle change in pressure that spoke of ancient power awakening. "They're coming," he said, his enhanced senses detecting the elevator's descent. For individuals heavily armed, moving with military precision. Rose nodded, her hands steady as she opened the codex to a specific page. "Then it's time for your first lesson in applied literary theory." "What?" "The prophecies aren't just predictions, Kale. They're instruction manuals. And this particular passage explains how a scholar and her hunter can turn any library into an impregnable fortress." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, disgorging for figures in dark suits who moved with the coordinated precision of a professional kill team. Their leader, a man with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, spoke into a communication device. "Target located in sublevel 3. Beginning extraction protocol." Rose looked up from the codex with a smile that would have seemed perfectly appropriate for story time with kindergartners. "Kale, would you mind terribly if we gave our visitors a proper demonstration of why knowledge is the most dangerous weapon in the universe?" As the syndicate agents spread out through the archives, Rose Whitmore began to read aloud from a text written before their civilization existed, her voice carrying words of power that would turn the next hour into a legend whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. The hunt had become something far more dangerous, a library war. Agent Dmitry Volkov had eliminated 47 targets across 12 different worlds, and never once had he encountered a library that fought back. Yet as he descended into the restricted archives with his 3-person extraction team, the air itself seemed to thicken with an almost tangible sense of anticipation. Books lined the walls like silent witnesses, their aged spines bearing titles in languages that predated galactic civilization. "Target is approximately 30 meters ahead," Agent Nix reported through her tactical display, her cybernetic enhancements providing real-time mapping of the facility to heat signatures. 1 human female, 1 unidentified. Volkov's ice blue eyes narrowed. His mission briefing had mentioned nothing about Rose Whitmore having protection. "Proceed with caution. Subject may have acquired off-world assistance." In the deepest section of the archives, Rose continued reading from the Convergence Codex while Kale positioned himself between her and the approaching threat. The ancient words seemed to resonate through the underground chamber, causing subtle changes that defied scientific explanation. The temperature dropped several degrees. Shadows grew deeper, and several protective cases began to emit a soft, pulsing glow. "Rose," Kale whispered urgently, "whatever you're doing, they're getting closer." "I'm activating the library's true defenses," she replied without looking up from the text. Before the syndicate existed, libraries weren't just storage facilities, they were living ecosystems designed to protect themselves and their contents. The first indication that something had gone wrong came when Agent Torres, positioned near the medieval manuscripts, suddenly found himself unable to move forward. Every step he took seemed to lead him back to the same bookshelf, as if the corridor itself had developed a recursive geometry that trapped him in an endless loop. "Volkov," Torres's voice crackled through the calm system, tension evident despite his professional training. "I'm experiencing some kind of spatial distortion. Recommend we His transmission cut off abruptly as the bookshelf beside him opened, like a door, revealing not another room, but a star-filled void that pulled at his consciousness with hypnotic intensity. Torres stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terrible beauty of infinite knowledge calling to him. "Torres, report," Volkov commanded, but received only static in response. Cale watched the approaching agent with growing concern. Rose's reading had transformed the archives into something that resembled a maze designed by a mad philosopher. But he could see Volkov adapting to the changing environment with the skill of someone who had survived countless impossible situations. "He's good," Cale observed, tracking the silver-haired agent's progress through what should have been an impassable labyrinth. Military training, enhanced reflexes, and enough experience to know when to trust his instincts over his instruments. "Then, we'll have to be better," Rose said, turning to a new section of the Codex. "This passage deals with the transformation of hunters into guardians. I think it might be particularly relevant to your situation." As she began reading the new text, Cale felt something fundamental shift within him. The shadows that had always been his allies grew deeper and more responsive. But instead of concealing him for predatory purposes, they seemed to embrace him as a protector. His enhanced senses expanded beyond their normal parameters, allowing him to perceive not just the physical location of threats, but their intentions and emotional states. Agent Nix discovered the change in Kel's nature when she attempted to flank their position through the ancient history section. Her cybernetic enhancements gave her superior speed and reflexes, advantages that should have allowed her to overwhelm any single opponent. Instead, she found herself facing someone who seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously, deflecting her attacks not with superior force, but with an understanding of her movements that bordered on precognitive. "Target has acquired unknown combat enhancements," Nix reported through gritted teeth as she rolled behind a display case. "To avoid Kel's counterattack, recommend immediate escalation to lethal force." "Negative," Volkov replied, his voice tight with frustration as he navigated another impossible corridor that seemed to fold in on itself. Subject Whitmore must be taken alive, adapt and overcome. But adaptation was becoming increasingly difficult. As the archives continued to transform around them, Agent Rice, the team's demolitions expert, found himself in a reading room where the books began to share their contents directly with his mind. Military manuals from civilizations that had never existed filled his consciousness with tactical knowledge that contradicted everything he had learned about warfare, while philosophical treatises challenged the very foundations of his worldview. "The knowledge," Rice whispered into his comm unit, his voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "It's alive. It's showing me things. The Syndicate, what they really are, what they've done." Rose looked up from the Codex as Rice's transmission reached them. "The archives are sharing the truth with him. Once you've seen it, really seen it, you can't go back to serving the lie." Cale nodded, understanding now why the Syndicate feared knowledge above all other weapons. Truth was contagious, spreading from mind to mind with a virulence that no physical force could contain. Volkov reached their position through sheer determination and decades of experience, emerging from the transformed maze with his weapon drawn and his ice-blue eyes fixed on Rose. "Enough games. You're coming with me, Ms. Whitmore." "Actually," Rose said, closing the Codex with a soft snap, "I think you'll find that the games are just beginning." The restricted archives fell silent around them, but it was the silence of a predator holding its breath before striking. Somewhere, in the maze behind Volkov, his team was being converted one by one from hunters into scholars, their minds open to truths that would make them question everything they had ever believed. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real battle was about to begin. The standoff in the restricted archives lasted exactly 17 seconds. Though to those present it felt like an eternity suspended between heartbeats. Volkov's weapon remained trained on Rose while Cale stood poised to strike, shadows coiling around him like living things. The Convergence Codex lay open between them, its ancient pages glowing with a light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their racing hearts. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Volkov said, his ice-blue eyes never leaving Rose's face. The Syndicate maintains galactic peace. Without our oversight, civilizations would tear themselves apart in endless wars. Rose smiled, the expression as gentle as if she were explaining a simple concept to a confused student. Peace built on ignorance isn't peace, Agent Volkov. It's just a very successful form of control. The alternative is chaos, Volkov replied. But his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. The archives had shown his team things that challenged everything they believed about their mission. The alternative, Kale said, stepping forward with fluid grace, is choice. The right of every being to decide their own fate based on truth rather than carefully crafted lies. As if summoned by his words, the three other agents emerged from the transformed maze of the archives, but they were no longer the efficient, hunting pack that had descended into the library. Torres moved with the wonder of someone who had glimpsed the infinite. Nyx's cybernetic enhancements flickered as they processed information that contradicted their core programming. Rice carried an armful of books, his demolitions training forgotten in favor of the revelations he had discovered. "Sir," Rice said, softly, his voice filled with a profound sadness, "we need to talk about the Eldorian incident, about what really happened to the civilian colonies." Volkov's weapon wavered slightly. The Eldorian incident was classified beyond their clearance level, but somehow the archives had shown his team the truth. Entire peaceful civilizations eliminated, not for posing any threat, but simply for developing technologies that might one day challenge Syndicate dominance. "The mission parameters remain unchanged," Volkov said. But the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Rose closed the codex and stood, moving with deliberate calm toward the man who had come to kill her. "Your mission was based on a lie. Agent Volkov, I'm not a threat to galactic stability. The knowledge I've uncovered doesn't promote chaos, it offers hope." "Hope for what?" Volkov demanded, though his weapon now pointed toward the floor. "Hope for a galaxy where different species cooperate instead of being dominated. Where knowledge is shared freely instead of hoarded by those in power. Where love can flourish across the vast distances between stars." Rose's eyes found Kel's as she spoke, and the connection between them was visible to everyone in the room. Nyx's cybernetic systems finally finished processing the contradictory information they had absorbed. "Sir, if the data we've accessed is accurate, our entire operational framework is based on suppressing evidence of successful peaceful coalitions. Species that have thrived without Syndicate oversight have been systematically eliminated or absorbed. Add to maintain order," Volkov said automatically, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "To maintain fear," Torres corrected. "The archives showed me communications between Syndicate leadership. They're not trying to prevent wars, they're ensuring that. They're the only ones with the power to wage them." Agent Volkov looked around at his team, seeing the same awakening in their eyes that Rose had experienced when she first opened the ancient texts. The truth was indeed contagious, and once it took hold, there was no going back to comfortable ignorance. "Even if what you're saying is true," Volkov said slowly, "what can four agents and a librarian do against an organization that spans half the galaxy?" Rose and Kale exchanged a look that spoke of shared understanding and unshakable resolve. "We start the quiet revolution," Rose said. "One mind at a time, one truth at a time, one choice at a time. The prophecies speak of sanctuary worlds," Kale added. "Places where those who choose knowledge over control can gather safely. The archives have provided us with coordinates over the following hours." As the library's ancient defenses gradually returned to normal, they made their plans. Volkov and his team would return to Syndicate headquarters with evidence of Rose's death fabricated, but convincing enough to buy them time. Meanwhile, Rose and Kale would begin the journey to the first sanctuary world, carrying copies of the most crucial texts and the translation keys needed to unlock their secrets. "This isn't how I imagined my life would change," Kale admitted as they prepared to leave Earth forever. They stood in Rose's apartment one final time, gathering the essential books and manuscripts that would seed libraries on distant worlds. "The prophecies suggested this would happen," Rose said, carefully wrapping the Convergence Codex in protective cloth. But I never imagined it would feel like this. Like what? Rose turned to face him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears and unbreakable determination. Like coming home and setting out on an adventure at the same time. Like finding the missing piece of my soul in the most unlikely person imaginable. Cale moved to her, his shadows wrapping around them both in a gentle embrace. The hunter finds the scholar, he quoted from the prophecy. When blade meets book, Rose continued. When darkness chooses light, they said together. Their first kiss was soft and tentative. A question asked and answered between the beings who had found in each other something worth changing the galaxy for. When they broke apart, both were smiling. So, Rose said, shouldering her pack filled with humanity's most precious books. Ready to start a revolution, Cale took her hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as words flowing across a page. With you, I'm ready for anything, as their ship lifted off from Earth's surface, carrying them toward the first sanctuary world and the beginning of their shared mission. The Convergence Codex glowed softly in Rose's lap. On its pages, new words began to appear, not prophecies this time, but the opening lines of a love story that would reshape the galaxy. The quiet revolution had begun, and its first victory was proving that even in the vast darkness between stars, love could light the way home.